Hello everybody, welcome into the greenhouse today. I thought I would bring you along as I deal with something that is probably the trickiest aspect of aquaponics, and that is transplanting out of an aquaponic garden. I'm going to go ahead and assume that if you've seen more than 5 videos on aquaponics, you've probably seen somebody go off about just how easy it is to transplant into an aquaponic garden. What you don't often hear about is how many plants die when you try and transfer them out of an aquaponic garden. These plants become ridiculously dependent on that very constant supply of fresh water to feed them, and therefore they don't necessarily develop the same type and quality of root system as a plant in a soil normally would. So in order to keep it alive, we have to treat it just a little bit differently than a standard transplant from soil to soil. So ultimately what we're going to do is build something that looks like this, more or less. Seems pretty straightforward. Gotta love a good shoelace. That'll all make sense by the end of the video, I promise. So stick around while I transfer the wisteria from the aquaponics into a similar setup and find out just how to keep your aquaponic plants well watered and safe in that transfer. This little wisteria. What an interesting little project it has been. But we're now going to gift it to a good friend of ours who works at the local convenience store. She commented about how much she would like one, and well, I just happen to have one here with nowhere else to be. So, perfect. So if you want to do this very simple project yourself, you're going to need a few things. First off, you're going to need a waterproof container. I'm using a Folgers can because they're everywhere, and I would suggest one with a tight-fitting lid. A coffee filter, standard size, a planting pot that will fit in your waterproof container, a bit of cloth, I am choosing a shoelace, and a knife or scissors or some other means to cut the plastic in the top of your waterproof container. Pretty simple, pretty easy to find. You're going to need to run your cloth material, like I said, I'm using a shoelace in this case, through the bottom of your planter pot so that you've got nice, easy, straightforward wicks for your soil. Now you can make it look a lot nicer than this. I did this in a super hurry a few years ago. Haven't bothered to change it because it still works. Basically I'm just putting this particular one back into play and giving it away. But I figured I'd show you how it worked. Inside the planter pot goes our standard coffee filter. You don't have to put that in there. I just like to do it to prevent soil falling through there and into my reservoir. Right? Pretty simple. Now it's up to you if you want to measure around the side of your container here before we cut it. But quick and easy. So the next step is basically to cut around our line here so that we can slip our planter pot neatly into place. So as you can clearly see, it is not a clean cut that I have put around there, and I kind of did that on purpose, and I'll show you why. As we insert this into the container, those little ridges give me room to move it and to slide it, and yet provide enough friction that it stays firmly in place. A little barbaric, but I really don't care. A gentle, even push with both hands, and that's nested nicely in place. Time to put a little soil and a wisteria into it. So you can see as I'm filling it, the coffee filter just kind of takes most of the soil and then gets pushed out to the edge. I might still lose a little bit into the can itself, but nowhere near as much as I would have without it. Well, I guess before I can pull out that wisteria, it's time to transplant my little accidental aquaponic radish here. See how this looks. That's really quite nice. I'm surprised. Alright, I think you're going to go in with the pepper for a little while, buddy. That's somewhat comical right there. The radish is almost bigger than the pepper. It's rooming with it at the moment. But we're now free to work on the wisteria. Alright, well this is interesting. I've got the camera balanced on a board on my lap while I do this over the fish tank. Looks like this first wisteria died on me, and the second did not. Alright. I was kind of expecting a larger root system in there. Splash, splash. Hope I'm not getting any on the lens. Alright. Clean that off and get back to you. Now that we've cleaned the roots off of this, we're ready to proceed. And like all things, you're going to want to spread the roots out a little bit, but as I mentioned earlier, you can clearly see aquaponic plants do not develop that same sort of root system that soil plants do. So let's cover this up before it gets too much air and too much sunlight. So now that I've topped that up and patted it fairly firmly in place, we have a sturdy little wisteria. But, as anyone who's transplanted out of aquaponics knows, if left like that, this thing would be dead by the end of the day. So we've got to fill up the reservoir. So we've got two really simple options when it comes to watering this. We can either peel off the lid, or we can just pull out the container. Either way, easy to do. Don't take but a few moments. Now I've got a fair bit of water in there because this compost and soil mix is not quite as moist as it looks. And really, when transplanting out of aquaponics, it's about keeping that soil moist, but not soaked, but pretty darn moist. In my experience, most of the time when a plant dies after being transplanted out of aquaponics, it's for one of two pretty obvious reasons. Either you've ripped off a massive chunk of the roots, which has a tendency to happen when my tomato plants get all intertwined amongst each other, or it simply doesn't have the water that it's used to. So, in the case of this wisteria, we should be alright. It looks like its roots are pretty much intact. All that's left to do now is make sure it stays nice and moist. Alright everybody, well I hope you find this helpful and somewhat informative on how to deal with the problems that come along with transplanting out of your aquaponic garden. I am going to head inside and start editing this up, and I will talk to you guys later. Have a fantastic day.